Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tech and Beer. We're live again today from the Celtic Corner in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. And today we're going to be talking about technology in sports, the future of technology in sports. And super exciting topic. I'm passionate about both. And our guest today is a real expert. He works for one of the top companies in Atlantic Canada, if not North America, that's really making great inroads and strides in pushing this sector forward. It's Kevin Forbes, who is Senior Product Strategist with Conduct. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Awesome. Welcome to Tech and Beer, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem. Cheers.
Cheers.
So let's have a sip of this beer here, because it's a very, very hot day.
It's steamy.
We've got some great weather here in Nova Scotia right now.
Yeah, a little bit too much humidity.
A little bit too much humidity, yeah. So tell me about you. Tell me about your background. What's your...
I've been fortunate. I've been working in sport and technology basically for the last almost 15 years now. Prior to working with Conduct, I worked for Sport Nova Scotia, which is the local representation for amateur sport in the province. I handled pretty much anything to do with technology for them. Nice. And then when I heard about this new company, so I heard about Travis McDonough, who's our CEO, came and presented to us, and at that point in time it was really an idea, and it was, looking at information on athletes in a different way. Right. So a lot of things, you think about what's being said about analytics, and you think about the movie Moneyball or things like that. This is all tied back to the human body. So the idea of making athletes healthier, making them more ready to play, making them, able to perform at a higher level for longer, and that's became something that I became very interested in, and was one of the first employees to join the company, and here we are almost 6 years later, and we've done quite well for ourselves, I guess.
Yeah,
is the best way to phrase
real
it.
Success story for sure.
Yeah.
So that was your kind of focus. Your goal was to work with data and athletes and helping them. So who are some of the companies that you work with that we might, or organizations that you work with that we might know of?
Yeah, so we've been extremely fortunate in the North American pro sport market. So we do have industry leading position across the four major professional sport leagues. So that would be the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL. So in those cases, we work with everyone from obviously the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Boston Red Sox, the LA Dodgers, the San Francisco 49ers, the Houston Rockets, the Washington Wizards. We've dealt with a number of very prominent brands, very prominent sporting organizations.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a sports team, what do you give me? Why are they working with you?
Well, I guess the biggest thing here is we've been responding to a lot of kind of industry trends. So over the last little while, the same way that a number of us all have smartwatches now, or we all have a cell phone in our pocket that tells us how many steps we have had every day. We're seeing that in sport, but a lot more specialized. So there's this explosion of data that's being monitored and tracked on an athlete, and so that can cover everything from how far and how fast they ran during a game, through to how hard they worked during practice, through to how many hours they slept at night, what their heart rate was during any of these activities, how much weight they lifted in the gym. All of these different activities are being tracked and monitored and so on. So for the folks that are traditionally the trainers of an organization, like the strength coaches or the ATs, or even getting into sports medicine and things like that, these folks are being asked to do a lot more. They're not just the ones that are watching to make sure the guy is lifting weight or kind of getting slapped by the towel as they walk through the dressing room. They're actually being asked to get a lot more involved in the science of things. And so it's something that had happened earlier across Europe and in Australia with the growth of the sports science industry, and it's now landed on the shores of North America quite a bit.
Wow.
So what we do is provide these organizations the ability to manage that information, obviously look amongst it all to try to find insights that cross these different areas, and then take action on top of it. So maybe that's building out strength and conditioning programming or rehabilitation interventions, or even just having a better conversation with maybe the athlete himself or other members of the team.
Right. So it's really insights into the athlete's performance and where they might be struggling but not even know they're struggling, and where they might be excelling, and helping them optimize the...
That's right. I mean, I know from just some of our conversations that you're a big motorsports fan. Right. So I mean, if you think of a professional athlete as being a race car, I mean, these are the mechanics. And, you know, the same way that, you know, a mechanic that happened, you know, 50 years ago was just somebody that, you know, was putting in some oil or, you know, making sure the tires were inflated and stuff like that. Now for, you know, a Formula One car, there's computers, there's wind tunnels, there's all this specialized equipment around that car, making sure that car is to that tiniest peak of performance. A professional athlete is no different. I mean, you see every day with competition the injuries that, you know, could affect a team's playoff chances, or, you know, means that, hey, a season is over potentially for a team if they lose a star player. And those are often the players that are at that precipice, that top level, because they're the ones that are being dependent on so much and are also, you know, so talented. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned, you know, Formula One there. I am a big F1 fan, and I feel like it's almost gone too far in F1. I mean, and obviously where you're talking about a machine being so dependent, I mean, the athlete, the driver's a big part of it, but the machine's critical. I mean, you get one team that gets a little edge, and you know, it can be a fraction of a second a lap quicker than everybody else, and the championship's almost over. Just that fraction of a second a lap. So you're telling me that the kind of minute gains that you can get in F1 can be achieved also in athletes?
Without a doubt. I mean, there's always going to be something that can never be measured. You know, we want to call it heart, we want to call it grit, we want to call it, you know, anything like that. There's the intangibles. There's always going to be something that we're never going to be able to measure. But, you know, we are talking about people that are in their peak performance, their peak physical condition. And, you know, I often remember a conversation I had with a director of performance for a hockey team. This was a few years ago now. And he was basically saying, hey, if I can remove every question from a player health and player readiness perspective, if I can, you know, remove the concerns that he didn't sleep well the night before, that he ate the right thing today, that, you know, he's not stressed out because of, you know, his kids or his wife or travel or anything like that, you know, that he's not, you know, tired or sore from the previous game, or if I can try to remove as many of those things as possible, many of those obstacles as possible, and you know, and make sure that he's 100% healthy. When he goes out to play, the only things that are going to impede him from having the best game of his life is obviously his own level of talent and the coach and the way that the coach utilizes that talent. And so, I mean, that's the ideal. We'll never get to that, but you know, that's kind of the ideal that we go with. Is, you know, it's always just a case. In this case, it's the competitive edge, right? Everyone is looking for the same way in Formula One. Everyone's looking for that little bit extra. You know, if I can have a player that is a little bit fresher in the third quarter or in the, you know, in overtime or anything like that, then that might be enough. That is, you know, in Formula One, that quarter or second, that might be that extra 3-pointer or that extra goal or that extra, you know, push at the, you know, at the 10-yard line.
And I think about, you know, you also talk about not being able to get all the way there like you can perhaps in an F1 car. You know, some of my favorite players from soccer or football, they're those players that can just produce that little bit of magic. That, how can you quantify that, right? You can't, you can't take that away, but maybe they don't work so hard. So is there a danger here that you've got an athlete, you know, all this data coming into the game, all these stats and analytics that you're using, and you know, this guy doesn't quite work as hard as everybody else, but guess what? He has that 30 seconds every game that changes everything.
And so, I mean, that's
are those players going to be eliminated, right?
I don't think so, because I think that's like, you know, at the end of the day, this isn't answers, right? It's a voice. You know, you think back the movie Moneyball. You know, great movie.
Great movie.
Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill. You think back to that movie, and it wasn't a case that every single thing that, you know, Jonah Hill came in with his little clipboard and every single thing he said they did. It was a voice to the table, and it's a different voice. And so, you know, having a better feel of, you know, who has it, who doesn't have it, or being able to quantify that a bit better is only going to help. I mean, to your point about maybe doesn't work as hard or doesn't move as fast or anything like that, there's a great idea in hockey that I know that they did some research with Chris Pronger when he was with the Oilers and then with the Ducks around efficiency of movement. Pronger was a player that played, you know, 30 minutes upwards a night, and if he was playing at, say, 100%, if he was at, you know, the red line all the time, he would have been gassed. And like, you know, that's the nature of the human body. As fit as you want to be or anything like that from an endurance perspective, you need to know, like soccer is a perfect example. You need to know when you can push, and know when you need to, kind of hold some in reserve. And so, but part of it is, hey, who can recover quicker? I mean, you hear a lot about the 45-second shift in hockey, and so knowing that, okay, who are the guys that go out and can go hard for 45 seconds, and if they're back on the bench for maybe 45 seconds or a minute and a half or whatever it looks like, maybe they're back to a good 80% or something like that, and that's going to lead them to being more competitive longer in the game, both in terms of the individual game, over the slog of the season, or over the length of their career.
And that reminds me of one of the pivotal games or matches of my youth that growing up that I watched. I'm a big Italy fan, and they made the '94 World Cup final, and Roberto Baggio had basically dragged them to the World Cup final himself, but he was injured. He should never have started the match in the World Cup final. He was totally ineffective. We had another great player, Zola, sat on the bench that they didn't put on because Baggio had taken it there. But if they had known that he was worn and they'd started the other guy and then maybe brought him on at the end when everyone else was kind of a bit worn down, I'm not saying it would have been different, but if they'd had the data, maybe it would have helped them.
Exactly. I mean, and that's the biggest part. We always like to talk about what we do with teams as being a tool. It's a voice. It's not an answer, but it's ways to be able to, hey, look at that evaluation and be like, hey, this guy, if he's playing at 60%, is he better than this guy over here at 90%?
Right.
And maybe that's as simple as it is, and that might affect how you're going to do your lineup. That might affect who you're going to sit and things like that. I mean, basketball is a sport that I think if you're a basketball fan at all, it was it's been a big thing over the course of the seasons about teams strategically sitting players. I remember there was a nationally televised game between the Cavs and the Golden State Warriors, and on the Cavaliers side, I think they sat LeBron, and on the Golden States they sat like Durant and Klay Thompson or something like that. And so it was like, well, none of the none of the stars that people would be tuning in to see were actually playing that game.
Yeah.
And of course they're saying, hey, from a standpoint we want to make sure we don't care about this game in the middle of the season.
Yeah.
It's against the opposing conference. It's not necessarily as impactful from a playoff perspective. We would rather have those guys ready to play in the playoffs when we really need them.
Long-term play.
Yeah. But part of that is some of those decisions right now are being made as just guesses. And I remember talking to a team. This had been one of the first years that Golden State really was taking off, and it was very, very famously Steve Kerr had sat down some of his players as the season kind of came to an end. And I remember talking to one of the other teams that we work with, and just talking about that, and he was like, it's really easy to make those decisions when you're 19 games up off of everybody else. So there is that level that needs to be kind of considered with this as well, but it is all, again, the same way that we're talking about, hey, that efficiency movement during a game, it's also during the slog of a season. In hockey and basketball both, you're playing 82 games over the course of 30-some weeks. It's a lot. You're traveling, coast to coast and back and forth, and there's a lot to deal with. There's a lot of pressure that's going on that athlete, and that's where that race car is going to break down potentially.
Right.
And then, not saying that we can ever prevent the race car from breaking down, but it is also more of a case of what are we going to do when it does.
Well, and if you can eliminate as many, like you said earlier, if you can eliminate as many of those errors and injuries and bits and pieces like that as possible, then you become more consistent, and you also know the best action to take when it does happen. Right?
For sure.
So let's talk about this beer a little bit.
Yeah,
we kind of skipped that at the beginning. Spindrift Kilink.
It's great, man. This is a refreshing beer.
It's super refreshing. It's it's not an IPA. What did they say?
Pilsner.
That's right. Yeah.
Definitely, it's definitely not bad for a warm summer day.
A little lighter, very drinkable.
Yeah.
Just what you need today.
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I was kind of hoping we'd be out on the patio or something like that. Hit the shades on, sit back.
I was gonna wear my shades just to kind of get the summer vibe going.
Oh yeah.
And the lights are pretty hot.
That and Hawaiian shirt day.
Hawaiian shirt.
That's gonna be the next show.
Next show, if the weather's still going on, it's a Hawaiian shirt. Tune in. Don't tune in. So tell me a bit about. So you don't create the data, but you pull all the data together. So tell me about the technology that you use and the technology that you integrate with.
For sure.
Kind of that's underpinning this great information that you can give back to the teams?
Yeah, so in basketball and football, in both cases, there are ways that player movement is being tracked during the game. So it's done actually very differently in both sports, and actually it's also being done in baseball as well. So in basketball, the system is known as it's second spectrum. It's a computer vision camera system.
Okay.
And so what that means is in the rafters of every NBA arena, there are a number of cameras focused on the play. They track the player, all the players on the court, and the ball position of the ball multiple times a second, and they turn that into XY coordinates. What we do with that information is we generate off of that values like obviously very simple values from a standpoint of like distance traveled. From that, obviously, you know the distance of the court. Court is standard across the entire association, so you can get information like accelerations. From that accelerations perspective, we can generate values that are more of a load value that looks at the overall impact of, hey, he accelerated this many times and decelerated this many times at this different magnitudes and things like that. What was the kind of wear and tear? What was the load, the impact that had on the athlete's body? And then different things like that where you know that, hey, for particular teams, they have particular traits either amongst themselves or against particular opponents. So knowing that, hey, this is a team that's going to make the opposing team run.
Right.
And then that gets into predictive analytics and being able to really start to dive in deeper and say, okay, this is over here, this is a team that, we know going into this game, this team is going to pressure our players in this position more.
Right.
And so is there a way we can mitigate against that? Is there a way that we know that, hey, if we sit a player for, maybe take him out early in the previous game, we can get a little bit more from him in this game and things like that. And so starting to get into that more, that planning scenario.
Okay.
In football, it's quite a different story because the season is quite different. You think in the NBA, you're playing maybe 2, 3, 4 times a week.
Right.
In football, you're really only playing once a week.
Yeah.
It's traditionally Sunday. Sometimes it's Monday. Every now and then Thursday. Sometimes there's like a Saturday thrown in there. But
sometimes they find the London.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a perfect example. So London. Sorry to go off on a little tangent here,
Sorry.
but the trip to London. I think this year, I forget exactly who was playing, but one of the teams opted to go early.
Okay.
Travel early and get it acclimated and basically be there and be ready to play. One of the other teams was like, you know what, I think they were like looking at it from, we're an East Coast team, this is when the game is, if we fly, if we're essentially still on the East Coast clock, we feel we might have an advantage. And so we're gonna fly right before essentially we're gonna fly like the day before or something like that. And this is like the worst anecdote ever because I don't actually know what the outcome was on this, but I do know that both teams had like a different strategy. And now I actually, it slips my mind on who actually kind of came out ahead there. But, those are the types of things that, you start to make decisions based off of, hey, should we, like sleep gets involved in that. There's a number of people that are kind of more sleep scientists in this, and they're doing consulting on, when players should sleep, when they should be ready, the whole concept of a pregame nap, all those different things. How to reset your clock if you're going from the west to the east versus the east to the west. Yeah. All these different factors, start to accumulate a lot of data. So, but sorry to back up. In football, the player tracking solution, it's actually RFID tags that are implanted in the shoulder pads of every NFL player, and so every NFL stadium has these giant receivers. They're put in place by a company named Zebra. Who also do things like inventory management and things like that. I know
Zebra.
Yeah, exactly. And so they, in addition to tracking inventory, they track NFL players.
Wow, why not?
Yeah, and so one of the things was GPS was a difficult one to do. I think at GPS your radius still is a couple feet. RFID is a lot smaller, and then. Teams now are utilizing that where they can wire up their practice field, and so then they can look and be like, okay, this is how we practiced during the week, and then this is how we played, and be able to kind of start looking at, okay, how we practiced versus how we played, and start to utilize that to obviously put together more efficient practice strategies, put together, prepare for the games in different ways, things like that, and start to look at what the results are, which is very fascinating. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that different. I guess it only makes sense, but different sports use different technologies to track their players and essentially get the same information.
Yeah,
you know?
well, and each one is very much fit for the sport itself. I mean, going back to the GPS error range, I mean, football's commonly known, hey, it's a game of inches, right?
Yeah.
If you have an error range of a couple feet, that's actually, substantial.
Yeah.
And especially,
Information's just not relevant.
if you're a lineman or something like that, you might only be moving like, a little bit each, but how do you you need to be able to quantify that in some way, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when you look at the technology in sports and the industry as a whole, obviously you guys are doing great work, but what other strides and technologies out there excite you? What interests you? And maybe it's stuff that you guys are going to get into in the future, but...
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a few things, even just stuff that we've been talking about at the office. And like, I don't know if it's ever something we'd be getting into, but if you haven't looked at it before, CBC did this amazing app during the Olympics, VR app. And it was just a little mobile app that they did. Yeah. But they did the VR cameras at different events, and so if you've got like the cardboard or anything like that, any of the VR viewers, you can actually kind of slip the headset on and look around like you're sitting at the event and watch freestyle ski from a vantage point or 2 or 3 vantage points down the field or down the hill. Yeah. And the same with like curling or anything like that. And like that to me, I mean, obviously one of the main reasons why I started working for Conduct in the first place is because I'm such a, I'm a sports junkie. I love it. Even, it's one of those things where I feel like my wife gets kind of upset with me at times because I feel like even when I'm at home, I'm still reading about sports or like, trying to find out new things and things like that, even especially on the analytics side of things. But that sort of idea of being able to, regardless of where the event is, all of a sudden being able to watch the event like you're there, I think that's going to change, if they can start to figure out how they, how they handle broadcast. But, there's nothing like live sports. No. There is nothing like live sports, but, not everyone can afford to go everywhere, and not everyone can, can get into, see the Stanley Cup
Stadium's only got so many seats,
or the Super Bowl or anything like that. But, all of a sudden, if you can maybe, drop a few extra dollars and have some headsets and watch the Super Bowl like you have one of the best seats in the stadium, like, I don't know, I would say I would do it. It would be amazing to do.
I never even thought of that. That's phenomenal.
Yeah, and so that's something that, like, it's, again, I don't even know how we would ever, get involved with that from a technology perspective. But for me personally, as a sports fan, like, that's something that I think is going to happen in the near future. That's just going to change the way that, we interact with sports as a whole.
And you think of from a business perspective, the revenue that could potentially drive for teams. For sure. I mean, they already make hundreds and hundreds of millions, if not billions, from TV revenues. That's really cool.
If you're sacrificing maybe one seat in your arena or stadium, but that one seat is also being, rented out digitally by thousands of people for, a nominal amount, you're going to make that money back a tenfold.
Well, how many people watch the Super Bowl?
Exactly. Yeah. And then how many people, are fanatic enough that they watch they don't just watch the Super Bowl, but they also watch the NFL Combine, and they also watch all of the NFL draft coverage, including the actual draft, and like all those different things. Just get those people, and like that's going to make your money back right there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the other side that's more tied to the work that we do is now that all this information is being collected on athletes, the athletes themselves are becoming a lot more informed.
Right.
So there's a lot more conversation around who owns the data, where that data is going. I mean, I think you guys had some folks on, Travis Barlow on, talking about data security and things like that. And obviously after things like what happened with Facebook and so on, that leads to a lot more questions. Who, where is my data going? Who is seeing it? And the value on that data. I mean, it's one thing, and not to get too deep into the privacy conversation, but it's one thing for information like you and I to be out there in terms of, hey, this is how many steps I took today and things like that. But if you're LeBron James,
you're a business.
Just because it's that name beside it, that data intrinsically has a lot more value, and more people are going to be interested into it.
Right, and I mean, and he's a business, and does he own the data? Does his team own the data? If he plays with the team, data? Who owns the data, and what happens to that data? Right. I mean, and that brings up the question. You look at like cycling. The Tour de France has just finished, and there's a lot of controversy right now with some of the suspicions around previous winners and people that have cheated in the past, and that Team Sky, who just won the Tour de France with their second rider, supposedly, he just won the Tour de France, but Chris Froome released all his data as he was winning the last major tour.
Whoop.
Because there were so many questions,
Yeah.
right? But potentially in other sports, like, would you want to release the data? Like, again, maybe as a cyclist where it's dependent on the athlete a lot, you can't kind of replicate it, but maybe, hey, these guys are releasing their data, I can pick out his weak spot.
Well,
This guy's not good at that.
And part of it is a lot of it now goes back to just overall like familiarity with it in terms of who is, like, what is this information being used for? I mean, I think initially there's the apprehension that, hey, this is information that's going to be used to decide my next contract, or this is information that's going to be used to decide whether you're going to keep me or cut me, like those types of things. And a lot of it needs to be explained better to the athlete, and that's where, you know, we've been working a lot with teams to try to, you know, present ways that we can explain that information better, so that you can then get player buy-in on things, like, so that you know this is actually used. We're trying to prolong your career. We're trying to make you more healthy. We're trying to make sure that you can compete at a higher level, and ideally that becomes a win-win for both the team as well as the athlete.
And if the data is not secure, potentially it could impact things like match fixing, gambling.
For sure.
There's already challenges around that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Interesting. Fascinating. Well, no, thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. I feel like we could talk about this for like more than one episode. We need to have you back, I think.
For sure.
And
I'd
go deeper into
love
this topic.
to come back. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. I'll bring the Hawaiian shirts. You bring the beer. It'll be great. Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
So, yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks very much. It's been a great episode. We've got a couple of interesting things we just want to tell you about. A couple of prize draws we're going to do. We've got a T-shirt, Tech and Beer T-shirt that we're going to be giving away. We've got a T-shirt from Kinduck that they're kindly donating that we're going to be giving away. And we've got a Bluetooth speaker. And if you want a chance to win that, tag your most competitive friends. So use our posts on Facebook, on LinkedIn, YouTube, and tag your friends that are the most competitive, and you'll be entered into a draw. Simple as that. So yeah, thanks very much, guys. It's been a great episode. See you next time.